The 2024 Las Vegas GP was a lot of fun, from the overtakes to the driver drama, and in general there were a lot of good performances in the middle and some pretty bad performances from some drivers. And you guys have asked for this for a long time, so if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe. It would mean a lot. We got a goal of 70,000. But let's get started with the winners and the losers for Vegas. We're also going to do a neutral and go over a predictions overview. So my predictions coming into this race, they were pretty bad to say the least. At least for the best teams, we all thought Ferrari was going to be very good here. Looking at it, Ferrari, McLaren, and Red Bull is what I had as the order. Well, quite the opposite. It would probably be Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, then McLaren. They were off the pace, so that is an L for me right there on the best teams. As for the worst teams, I think I actually did a pretty spot-on job. Sauber was the worst, but they had some pace still. They had a very good strategy with Zhou, and that ended up actually paying off almost for points. They're still at 0. But Williams didn't really have the pace. Alex actually looked pretty good, but obviously he got out of the race pretty quickly. Aston, honestly, between Williams and Aston, you could throw them between 8th or 9th. Ocon in the Alpine was pretty slow as well, but I think this is pretty accurate, so I'll give myself an okay here. And for the top 5, I blended them all. That's by far the hardest, and neither of these positions are correct. Max was the closest, and Lando was behind Max, but in P6, so I did not get those correct either. Starting for the winners on the Las Vegas GP, we'll go over 5 of them, but some honorable mentions that need to be brought up. Fernando had a very good GP. Regardless of him not getting into the points, he went for a strategy that was very bold and actually dictated the whole midfield as to when they were going for the pit stops and so on. He did a great job at containing the graining. The car is just not good. It's super slow, and the tires get chewed up in seconds. So Fernando had a great race. He was actually very happy with it and said that the pace and the grip of the car was better than usual. As for the other honorable mention, sadly, he's an honorable mention. He would have definitely been a winner if he finished the race. It's Pierre Gasly, who had an outstanding qualifying. Unfortunately, it's hard to give him as a winner because he did not finish the race. So it's hard to say where he could have finished up because it could have gone great or bad, and unfortunately we didn't get to see either. But let's go in order from 5 to 1, who I think are the biggest winners of this GP. At P5, I got Yuki Tsunoda. He did a great job of getting that car in the points and really giving RB a good kick in these constructors. They're still competing there with Haas and both Alpine, and that's all due to Yuki. His teammate was not up there with him like he typically is. Yuki did a great job. I only really have him down here because he ended up getting overtaken by Nico, but a great race regardless. The qualifying was good, got himself in Q3, and did a very good job in the race to contain points in a car that was probably outperformed by that of Yuki Tsunoda. At P4, this might come as a shock, it's Lewis. I have Lewis up here in a winner because he did do a good job. Do I think he should have been driver of the day? I don't think so. I think George Russell had what was a pretty much perfect performance, and Lewis did a great job in a very fast car. But that's not to take away from the overtakes that he was making, how quick he was, and catching up to Russell by the end of the race, whether that's because Russell was kind of slowing down or because Lewis was genuinely fast. He does say in his interviews after, if he actually qualified better, he thinks he would have had a very easy time on the victory, but regardless, that's a if. He did make the mistake in qualifying, so unfortunately Lewis can't go much higher than the other drivers who did what I think a little bit of a better job here in this winners column. In that third position, I got Nico. Nico had an outstanding GP, put Haas in a very good position above Alpine again, and had pretty much a flawlessly executed race. His teammates was struggling in the back. Nico, safe, clean, didn't have too many overtakes, but when he did make them, they were very nice, and was very calm and controlled. He was pretty much the tire whisperer for the Haas team. That's at least what they say, and it was a very commendable performance by that of Nico Hülkenberg. The guy in second position is one that probably hasn't been in any winner's list for a very long period of time. It's Guan Yu Zhou. He had an amazing race for a car that is just horrible. But he made the most out of it. They did a decent strategy, and Zhou executed the strategy pretty much to perfection. He was great on his tires, he was clean, and extracted the most pace possible from what is solidified as the 10th car out of the 10 teams. He's had a rough season, like very rough. Valtteri has been much quicker on most tracks, but this was a very good track for Zhou. It has to be commended. He was up 6/10 on Bottas in race pace, so he has to be mentioned in these winners. But the guy that's in one for me, and I think it should be everybody's one, is George Russell. It's hard to not have him here when the guy was P1 for the whole race, He had an outstanding weekend. He qualified P1, retained that position in the race, never lost it, and overall had what was probably his best victory. While it might have not been too much action at the front for George, it's exactly what he needed. He put those tires in the perfect condition, was never really struggling. We didn't see any mistakes from the guy. He is becoming a beast. Slowly but surely, George is definitely going to be up there in contention with Max and the other drivers very soon if he keeps up what he's doing, because his qualifying pace is outstanding and his race pace is only getting better. Now, while George is P1 in this winners list, it should be a given that Max Verstappen is the real winner of Las Vegas because he is the world champion, and under these circumstances, in a winners and losers for Vegas, Max Verstappen is the top dog. I didn't even want to include him in the top 5 because he did exactly what he needed to. He had a clean race. It was outstanding from the point of this is what he needed to do to actually win the race. And man, what a deserving 4-time world champion. The winner, obviously, for the team is Mercedes. I mean, that's just a given. Mercedes was amazing here. Both George and Lewis were lightning quick. I wonder if the car is going to have any more GPs like that. I don't think so, because this track is a big outlier to the rest of them. It's just very cold conditions. And the only track that could have given us something like this was Canada. That's why we saw the Mercedes being so quick. When it's cold conditions and the actual track itself isn't at a very high temperature, they're able to keep those tires in a great window, and that's where the Mercedes car and really the team comes alive. Now that brings us to the neutral selection in this race. Now you can put a lot of drivers here, but we're going to go over what I think were the 3 most middle grounded drivers in this GP. Lando Norris was one of those drivers for me. Yes, you could argue he lost the championship here. He could have been much quicker, risked a lot more. The car was just not in a good window. He did much better than his teammate, was quicker the whole entire GP, and really overall in the practice sessions, it was Lando the one leading, and it was clean. It was a clean race. There wasn't too many mistakes from him. The car was unfortunately slow, and this wasn't a blunder by Lando. It was an actual decent GP for him, so I'd put him in the middle. Another driver here in this middle list is Charles Leclerc, who I thought was going to have a much better GP. Partially, it was down to the car not being as fast as that Mercedes. That thing was lightning, but he did end up ruining his tires in that first stint. Also in the second stint, he was pretty much behind Carlos for the most part of it, up until there was really that blunder by Ferrari. I do think Carlos had the edge over him. I wouldn't put Carlos as a winner. He did end up getting on the podium, but I don't think he was better than the guys that I mentioned. Regardless, Carlos was better out of the 2 here in the GP. I think the frustration was definitely getting to Charles in this GP, understandably so. He didn't have his best performance. He's been really good on the tires for the most part this year. He tried going for the overtake on George early on, and that really snowballed into what wasn't a perfect GP for Charles. Regardless, it wasn't a bad one. I think he did what he could, with the exception of beating his teammates, which depends on how you look at it, could be down to a couple of factors. And last in this neutral list, maybe surprisingly so, is Alex Albon. Yes, he didn't have a great qualifying, but that has a lot to do with the team. In the race, he was up into the points and arguably could have been in the exact same position that Nico finished in, so it could have been a very good race for him. Too many problems, too many different outliers for Alex to really know. He barely had any time in FP1 or FP2. Then come qualifying, they put him in a really bad spot and the tires were just not warmed up at all because of the way Williams was really controlling that part of qualifying. And a lot of factors were down to the team rather than the driver. He had a great race for the little time that he was in it. And yet again, another problem for that Williams team when it comes to the PU. As for the neutral teams, it's going to be McLaren. You could arguably put them up in losers, but I would feel like that's unfair. The car wasn't quick. This wasn't their GP, and sometimes it just happens because every team has had that one GP where they've been behind. For Red Bull, it was Monza. For Ferrari, it was pretty much Brazil. And the list goes on and on. Every one of those top 4 teams has had one of those GPs. For this one, it's been McLaren in Las Vegas. Now to go over the losers in this GP. Unfortunately, we did have some, and let's go over the 3 that I picked. In P3, I have Liam Lawson. The Kiwi did not have his best race. He started behind in qualifying. He wasn't able to actually make up on the time that Yuki was able to get into Q3. And yes, the expectations are pretty high for him. He hasn't raced a lot, but he's had a lot of time to prepare. First time in Vegas, and it wasn't a Liam Lawson performance we've been getting like the last couple of GPs. And for me, out of the 20 drivers, it was one of the weaker performances we got on the grid. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't a Liam Lawson-like performance. Then the second driver that really did not have a good weekend overall is Checo, and that's mainly because he went out in Q1. He did have an amazing overtake here in Vegas. That's nothing to take away from it, but that's one great thing in a lot of bad things here in Vegas, and overall this 2024 season, it has been pretty miserable for the Mexican driver. And Vegas was a track that was supposed to suit the style of Sergio Perez, and he just didn't have it. The grip was not there. Max was constantly ahead, and by a big margin as well. And while he didn't crash, he only ended up getting up to P10. He got beaten out by the sister team, which has now became more of a regular. He's one of those drivers that's gotten out in Q1 more than that of Fernando Alonso, who's been driving a trash can for half of the season. So there really isn't an excuse that you can use for Checo to kind of clarify what's been happening over there at the Red Bull team. It's really looking like Yuki should be the replacement here, but with all that sponsorship money, I think Checo's going to stay. And to who I think had the worst weekend here in Vegas, it's been Colapinto, who I've had an enormous amount of praise for. The guy came in, he's automatically been performing. He is very quick, but he kind of has that tendency, like Max Verstappen in the early days, he likes to crash. And unfortunately that comes with speed, but this crash was very, very driver error. He went into it himself. He was the only driver to really crash out throughout the whole weekend. There have not been crashes into the wall, even though Vegas can be tricky. And that's why I got to give it to Colapinto. And he will have GPs like this. It's just how it is throughout a season. We've all been full of praise with this Argentinian driver. He's been amazing. Vegas has just not been that weekend, and unfortunately, he's been my biggest loser out of the drivers for this weekend. But as for the team, I think it's pretty obvious. It's the 8-digit number of damage for the Williams boys. Yes, they have not been great. Yes, this team had so many issues that they had to go around, whether it be the PU, constructing different parts, starting from the pit lane because of Colapinto, Alex Albon not getting out in Q1. The team was disconfigured, and I'm glad that they have enough money to afford these parts with the sponsorships and so on, and everything is moving. But I have a feeling that they have broken the cost cap this year. It's been so much damage. Like I said, they're in 8-digit numbers here. The only team even close to that number is Williams for the Destructors. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on in the comments below. Give me your winners, neutral, and losers for the weekend. Also, let me know in the comments if you do like this format, and I'll keep it up for the rest of GPs and then going into 2025. Please leave me that feedback down in the comments below. Please leave a like, subscribe. It would mean the world, and peace.